You have waited 11 months for this morning, not because you were impatient, because the process takes that long. A research proposal submitted to the prefect of the Vatican Apostolic Archive, a letter of institutional affiliation, a written description of research objectives, references from 2 department chairs, a waiting period during which you assumed, more than once, that nothing was going to happen, and then, unexpectedly, a confirmation email, an authorized research slot, a date. You are standing in the Sala Indice del Fondo on a Wednesday morning. The room is smaller than you imagined. Fluorescent lighting, the smell of old paper and something chemical you cannot identify. A researcher in a white coat brings out a folder, sets it on the table in front of you. The paper inside is real, 600 years old. You are touching it with cotton gloves. And you are, and despite everything you know about archives and institutional bureaucracy and the reality of scholarly research, slightly breathless. You look up, past the door you came through, down the corridor to your left. There is a section you are not authorized to enter, the Reserva. The archivist is standing near the window. She has not looked up from her catalogue, but she says, without being asked, as if the question is always asked, that section requires special dispensation from the Holy See. You nod. You look back at the folder. The document in front of you is genuinely interesting. You have the rest of the afternoon. But for every remaining hour, while you are reading, while you are taking notes, while you are carefully turning pages 6 centuries old, you are also thinking about the door. Think about that for a second, because the thing I am about to show you is this. The most structurally damaging documents in the Vatican's holdings were never behind that door. They were in the reading room, in the open catalogue, misfiled, suppressed then published, sitting in peer-reviewed journals for 150 years. The restricted section was never the point. The misfiled folder in the ordinary stacks was, "My name is Nathan, former high school history teacher, Evansville, Indiana. 12 years at a Catholic school teaching world history and early Christianity. I resigned when the evidence kept leading me somewhere the institution was not prepared to follow." Let me tell you what the Vatican Apostolic Archive actually is, not the conspiracy version, the actual archive. 85 kilometers of shelving, that is not an approximation, 85 kilometers, running through underground vaults, multiple buildings, and 12 centuries of institutional correspondence. 35,000 volumes in the index alone. That is just the catalogue. More than 4,000 separate archival units, letters, legal documents, treaties, papal registers, administrative correspondence, from the 7th century to the 20th. And until October 22, 2019, it was called the Archivio Segreto Vaticano, the Vatican's secret archive. On that date, Pope Francis renamed it the Vatican Apostolic Archive. The official explanation, segreto in 16th century ecclesiastical Latin, did not mean secret in the modern conspiratorial sense. It meant private. A private administrative office, a personal filing system, not secret, just personal. They changed the name because the old name had become unmanageable. I read the press release the week it was issued. I wrote one sentence in my notebook. An institution that controls the language of its own identity changed that language because the old word had become a problem. I did not read that as a transparency measure. Think about what it takes for an institution to officially rename itself. A formal papal decree acknowledging that the word people used to describe you had become something you could no longer manage. The rename was damage control. That is where this investigation begins, not with the locked door, with the name they changed. I want to start with a document that almost nobody has heard of. Not because it is hidden, it is freely available. It has been freely available since 1680. It is called the Liber Diurnus Romanorum Pontificum, the daily book of the Roman pontiffs. A formulary, a collection of standard templates used by the papal chancery from approximately the 7th to the 11th centuries. If you were a new pope in the 9th century, there were certain letters you were expected to sign. Official forms, standard boilerplate, the institutional paperwork of running the church. One of those templates was Formula 84. Formula 84 required newly elected popes to formally recognize the Sixth Ecumenical Council, the Third Council of Constantinople, held in 680, and its specific decisions. One of the Third Council's specific decisions was this: it had condemned Pope Honorius I as a heretic. Honorius died in 638. He had served as pope for 13 years. 42 years after his death, the council convened and formally declared that a previous pope had accepted the monothelite heresy, the belief that Jesus had only one will, not two. They declared him anathema, condemned. Formula 84 required incoming popes to formally endorse that condemnation, in writing, as a condition of installation. For centuries, across generations of popes, across several hundred years of institutional continuity, newly elected heads of the Roman Catholic Church were routinely signing a document that cursed one of their predecessors as a heretic, not as a one-time exception, not as the painful resolution of a difficult theological dispute, as institutional boilerplate, standard paperwork, the form you sign before you move into the office. In 1650, Rome attempted to publish the Liber Diurnus. Vatican censors stopped the edition before it was distributed. The reason, according to subsequent scholarship, Formula 84. In 1680, a French scholar named Jean Garnier published it in Paris, over Vatican objections. It has been available since. In 1725, Pope Benedict XIII permitted limited circulation, but with falsified publication dates. The formula was still in it. In 1870, the First Vatican Council defined the doctrine of papal infallibility. A pope, when speaking ex cathedra on matters of faith and morals, cannot err. I want you to hold both of those facts at the same time. A pope condemned for heresy by an ecumenical council, with successive popes formally cursing him in writing as routine installation procedure. And a doctrine defined in 1870, declaring that popes cannot err in matters of faith. Both are in the institutional record, both are verifiable, both have been sitting in the same archive this whole time. They cannot both be right. Formula 84 is still in the Liber Diurnus, it is still there now. You came to this video with a specific image, you know the one. The amber lighting, the underground setting, the camera moving slowly past stone walls toward a vault. Production designers who work on these documentaries have made a collective aesthetic decision about what the truth looks like. It looks subterranean. It looks sealed. It looks like something that requires clearance you do not have. And the implication is always the same. The real documents are below. The dangerous ones are locked. The proof that would change everything. The gospel they burned. The letter they buried. The evidence that Jesus survived the cross or had children or was a Roman political invention. That document exists somewhere in the basement. And the church knows it. And you know they know it. And that is the standoff. I understand the appeal of that image. It gives the problem a location. It gives the institution a specific, identifiable motive. It says, somewhere below us, there is a room, and inside that room is the thing they do not want us to see. But that is not what I found. What I found was different, and in some ways harder to resolve, because the documents I am going to describe to you were never in the basement. They were never sealed. They were not burned. They were not moved to a restricted section when scholars got too close. They were in the reading room, in published editions, in peer-reviewed journals, available to credentialed researchers since the 17th century. The institution did not keep these things hidden. The institution did not need to. That is the part that is hard to sit with. Let me tell you how I actually got here. I was not working from a leak. I did not find a disgruntled archivist. I did not receive a package with a photocopy of something restricted. About 8 months before I started this, I read an academic newsletter, a single paragraph announcing the Vatican's renaming of the archive, the kind of thing that gets forwarded between historians and then forgotten. I read it twice. I wrote one sentence in my notebook. An institution that controls its own name changed that name because the old name had become a problem. I spent 3 weeks trying to arrange access through a contact. An Italian medievalist I had met at a conference in Indianapolis. She had spent 6 months working in the open section of the archive, the publicly accessible part, the shelves any credentialed researcher can reach, on a project related to 13th century papal correspondence. Her response came from Rome. A short email. It said, "The thing that surprised me most was not the restricted section. It was how much of the open section nobody reads. I put the email down. I opened the Vatican Apostolic Archive's own publicly available finding aids, the catalogs that describe what is in the open sections, the same documents any credentialed researcher can access from anywhere with an internet connection. I spent a week in those catalogs. I found the Chinon Parchment in a 2007 peer-reviewed book by a Vatican-employed paleographer, published by an academic press, available on research databases. I found the Liber Diurnus in Jean Garnier's 1680 edition, 346 years old, freely available in research libraries. I found the Codex Vaticanus in a facsimile edition the Vatican Library published itself, 1999. Available to any scholar with access to an academic library. I never went to Rome. I found everything at my desk in Evansville, in published editions, in the open catalogue. The thing that surprised me was how much of the open section nobody reads. I have thought about that sentence nearly every day in the 8 months since. You were taught, in catechism or in a confirmation class, or by a priest who said it with the same calm confidence he would use for any obvious fact, that the Pope, when speaking officially on matters of faith and morals, cannot err. You may have accepted that. You may have quietly placed it among the institutional doctrines that felt more structural than theological. Either way, you heard it said. You know what the doctrine is. First Vatican Council, 1870. Solemn definition. Now, hold this beside it. Pope Honorius I died in 638. 42 years after his death, an ecumenical council, one of the Church's own officially recognized councils, not a dissident gathering, not an outside body, formally declared that a previous pope had taught heresy. They condemned him, used the word anathema. The condemnation was not contested. It was not reversed. It was built into the institutional practice that followed. For centuries, incoming popes were signing Formula 84 of the Liber Diurnus, the document that formally endorsed the condemnation of Honorius, as a routine part of their installation. Not controversial, not reluctant. Standard paperwork, something every new pope did before he took office. One pope declared infallible in 1870. A previous pope condemned for heresy by an ecumenical council in 680, with successive popes formally endorsing that condemnation in writing. Both documented, both verifiable, both in the same institutional record. They both cannot be right. The document that proves it has been available since 1680. It is not in the Reserva. Formula 84 is still in it. In September 2001, a paleographer named Barbara Frale was doing administrative work in the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Her specific task, checking an index entry against its corresponding folder. A catalog discrepancy, the kind of task that does not generate headlines. The folder was misfiled. She noticed that the index number did not match the folder's contents. Inside the misfiled folder was a parchment, dated August 17th through 20th, 1308. Location, Chinon, France. Written by 3 papal emissaries, Cardinals Berenguer Fredol, Etienne de Suisy, and Landolfo Brancacci, sent by Pope Clement V. The parchment documented a secret interrogation. Clement's emissaries had traveled to Chinon and examined the leaders of the Knights Templar, among them Jacques de Molay, Grand Master. The conclusion was specific. The Templars were found guilty of minor offenses, innocent of heresy, the capital charge. The parchment records Clement V's formal absolution of the Templar leaders. In writing, dated, authenticated. It is the Chinon Parchment. Frale published her findings in the Journal of Medieval History in 2004. The full account appeared in her 2007 book on the papal trial of the Templars. The Vatican confirmed the document's authenticity. They published it. It is in the peer-reviewed literature. Now let me tell you what else is in the historical record. Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake, March 18, 1314. Pope Clement V died April 20, 1314, 33 days later. Clement had formally, legally, and in writing absolved de Molay of heresy. The same Clement was alive as de Molay burned for heresy, 6 years after signing the absolution. Under pressure from Philip IV of France, who had demanded the Templars' suppression for financial and political reasons, and who had the military means to enforce that demand. One pope, one absolution, one condemnation, both on paper, same hand. Barbara Frale found the document not because of a tip or a theory, because a number did not match a folder. 700 years of misclassification ended because an archivist checked an index entry. There is a manuscript in the Vatican Library, Vat GR 1209. It appears in the Vatican Library catalogue for the first time in 1475. It has been in that catalogue continuously for 550 years. It is the Codex Vaticanus, one of the two oldest virtually complete Greek New Testaments in existence, dated approximately 300 to 325 of the Common Era, early 4th century, within a few generations of the documents it copied. Bart Ehrman, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, whose Misquoting Jesus was published by HarperCollins in 2005, describes the Codex Vaticanus and its companion, the Codex Sinaiticus at the British Library, as the two most important surviving manuscripts of the New Testament. Bruce Metzger, whose textual commentary on the Greek New Testament is the standard reference in the field, agrees on their priority. In Vat GR 1209, in the manuscript, the Vatican Library has held since 1475. The Gospel of Mark ends at chapter 16, verse 8. The verse reads, "Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid." Period. That is where Mark ends. The verse is known as Mark 16, 9 through 20. The appearance of the risen Jesus to Mary Magdalene, the appearance to two disciples on the road, the appearance to the 11. The Great Commission to go into all the world and preach, baptism, speaking in tongues, handling of snakes, are absent from Vat GR 1209, not crossed out, not marked as uncertain, not annotated with a note of doubt. Absent. There is a blank space after verse 8 in the Codex Vaticanus. Scholars have noted it since the 19th century. The blank space suggests the scribe knew a continuation existed and chose not to copy it, or could not verify it from his source, or did not recognize it as original to the text he was copying. Codex Sinaiticus independently, at the British Library, Mark ends at verse 8. Westcott and Hort's 1881 critical edition established this. The Nestle-Aland critical apparatus, the current standard used by every major New Testament seminary in the world, agrees. The longer ending of Mark is a later addition, not in the oldest manuscripts. This is not a recent discovery. It is not a finding the institution is still responding to. Westcott and Hort established the significance of the manuscript in 1881, 144 years ago. The Roman Catholic lectionary continues to include Mark 16, 9 through 20 at Sunday Mass. The critical apparatus is not contested on this point. Every major New Testament commentary in the past 150 years agrees. The manuscript does not contain the verses the institution reads at Mass. The Vatican Library has held that manuscript since 1475. I have sat with that for 8 months, and I am still not sure I know exactly what to do with it. But the record is the record. The document is in the catalogue. Vat GR 1209. It has been there the entire time. There is a question that I think is doing the most work in this investigation. And it is not the question I started with. I started with, what is the institution hiding? But none of the 3 documents I have described were hidden. They were in the open catalogue. They have been available for decades, in some cases for centuries. The question that is actually doing the most work is different. How does an institution hold documents that contradict its own doctrine for 500 years and continue teaching the doctrine? J.J. Benitez has spent 40 years working with the architecture of institutional information. In Caballo de Troya, across 10 volumes documenting the structural logic of the early church, his narrators describe a principle that Benitez has articulated directly in interviews across his career. He calls it architecture, not conspiracy. His observation is specific. A burned manuscript creates a martyr text. The moment you destroy something, it becomes sought after. It circulates in copies. It generates the exact attention it was meant to suppress. Burning something is the most reliable way to ensure it survives. A misfiled document creates no martyrs. A formulary suppressed in 1650, published in 1680 with falsified dates, never explained at Sunday school, creates no movement of people who have been wronged. An inconvenient manuscript ending, noted in a critical apparatus that most clergy never read, does not generate communities of resistance. These documents do not create martyrs because they were never destroyed. They create silence, not the silence of the locked room, the silence of the reading room with an open access policy for credentialed researchers, a 46-page catalogue entry, a finding aid that tells you exactly where everything is, and a Sunday reading that never mentions what else the catalogue contains. Benitez does not call this conspiracy. He calls it the most effective form of institutional management there is. Keep the document exactly where it is, in the open catalogue, under the correct call number. Confirm its authenticity when asked. Publish it when a scholar requests it. Let the institution's own scholars study it, and never, in any Sunday Mass in the history of the institution, stand at the lectern and explain what the catalogue contains. The institution does not need to hide what it can simply fail to explain. For me, that is the most disturbing conclusion of this investigation. Not that there are locked doors, that the open doors were already enough, and nobody needed to notice this Sunday. Wherever you attend, or used to attend, or drive past on the way somewhere else, if the lectionary assigns Mark 16, a reader will stand at the front of the room. He will open the book. He will read. Verse 9. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. Verse 15. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Verse 16. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. He will close the lectionary. He will say, the gospel of the Lord. You will respond, or you will not respond, or you will be somewhere else entirely, driving, making coffee, doing whatever you do on Sunday mornings now. But the Vatican Library will continue to hold vat.gr 1209, catalogued since 1475, the oldest near-complete Greek New Testament in existence, in which those verses do not appear, in which Mark ends at verse 8, in which the women fled from the tomb and were afraid and said nothing to anyone, in which the story simply stops. That manuscript has been in the Vatican Library for 550 years, in the institution's own holding, in the institution's own catalogue, confirmed by the institution's own scholars, established by the critical apparatus every New Testament seminary in the world uses as its standard reference. The reader at Sunday Mass will not mention it. He will say, the gospel of the Lord. He will sit down, the congregation will continue, and vat.gr 1209 will continue to sit in the catalogue, where it has been since 1475, where it will be next Sunday. I want to go back to something my Italian medievalist contact wrote to me. The thing that surprised me was not the restricted section. It was how much of the open section nobody reads. She was not making a political point. She was describing her 6 months doing archival research, telling me what she had actually found surprising. I want to be honest about the reserva. I do not know what is in it. Nobody outside the institution does. The Vatican's own published finding aids reference its existence. They describe categories of documents it contains. Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith files not yet released. Correspondence from the pontificates of Pius XI and Pius XII, partially opened in 2020, many documents still restricted. I did not speculate about what is behind the door you cannot open. I did not need to, because when I spent a week in the publicly available finding aids, the open section, the part any credentialed researcher with a legitimate institutional affiliation can access, I found the Chinon Parchment in a journal article. I found the Liber Diurnus in a 346-year-old published edition. I found the Codex Vaticanus in a facsimile the Vatican Library published itself. Everything was at my desk. In Evansville. Without going to Rome, without requesting special dispensation from the Holy See, without ever encountering a door I was not authorized to open. Barbara Frale found the Chinon Parchment because she noticed a catalogue number that did not match its folder. She was not following a theory. She was not working from a tip. She was checking an index entry, doing her job, and the document that proves a pope formally, legally, and in writing absolved a man he was simultaneously condemning to burn at the stake had been in the archive for 700 years. Not hidden, misfiled, the Vatican confirmed its authenticity. They published it. It is in the Journal of Medieval History. It is in a 2007 book. It is in the peer-reviewed literature where anyone who looks for it can find it. The most damaging document in the Vatican's holdings was found because an archivist checked an index entry. Not hidden, misfiled, and the most revealing thing about the Vatican's holdings is not what is behind the door you cannot open. It is what has been sitting in the reading room, in the open catalogue, in published editions, available for anyone who followed the footnotes the entire time. This is Nathan, Forbidden Gospels.